Hello and welcome back. Great. So now we start into the third part of our symposium today, the panel discussion. And before we start, I was asked to remind everybody to sign yourself in the communication list, if you would like to, of course. One of the benefits, for instance, would be that you receive information when the documentation is online, because the sessions are being recorded today, right? So yes, please feel free to write your name into the list. And before we start, a little recap, right? We wanted to meet today to speak about how cities can plan cultural spaces and artist working spaces for them to follow their work in a sustainable way and to be part of urban practice to support life in the city. That was one idea about today. Then we also wanted to speak about the European perspective, be able to have a look at Copenhagen, London, Hamburg, Berlin, Munich is here also, I think, so to go into a comparative approach. And we also wanted to speak about how we can build networks across borders, which is, for IGBK's side, I can speak, one of our big focus. And yes, so we were all at the World Café format. And maybe at the beginning, I will just allow myself to read out some cards. There were many cards, about 50. I cannot read everything out, but I've selected some to put some terms in. And maybe then each of you can also say 2 or 3 sentences what remained with you from except for you, Sylvia, but yes, the organizer, what remained for you from the World Café. So, what was a subject at the World Café? The issue of power balance appeared many times amongst the different stakeholders, associations, politicians, and how this can be achieved. And also new actors were identified. For instance, the role of project developers, for instance, which we didn't speak about before. And also, of course, who owns the land that all this discussion is about. At the same time, when so many actors appear on the scene, you may also have the difficulty that all of a sudden there are too many middle persons. Can also be a goal to reduce the actors, so it's a question. Often the setup of a cooperative was mentioned as a setup for active persons to find new models to have long-term possibilities. Again and again, numbers, like you all stated, Mikala, and also I think all 3 of you stated the importance of studies and having numbers present in the question of power balance. What is an important question, and I think we will come back later to that today also, is that there's a sort of all of a sudden there's like this triangle of social questions, ecological questions, and artistic questions rising up in urban discussions, and sometimes these are being played out against each other. So it's always the question, what is the argument we are using, and how do we not get played out against each other? And maybe with the argument also comes along the question of impact, because impact is maybe an argument. So that's my introduction, a bit from the World Café format. And maybe who would like to start? Leah, would you like to start and say some words about your table?
Okay. Maybe I'll start with power balance, because I find that very interesting. As we know, the cards are very much stacked against artists, being either as individuals or as collectives, when talking about things like development, or being able to get that foothold in. And so I think that is true. It's very, very true now, but it's not been any less true in the past, that imbalance has always been there. What I would say in terms of trying to push forward projects, or being able to push forward the needle on where planning is, or where priorities are, is although there exists an overall power imbalance, and that is undeniable, there are always moments where that power shifts, and it doesn't stay there for very long, and it won't stay there, it won't be stable, but there are always intersection points where you hold more power than you would traditionally have, or because somebody is wanting something from you, or because the problem, which sometimes looks overwhelming, is a big problem for the other party. And so in terms of urban planning, in terms of particular situations, thinking like really practically about that, if you are walking past a building that is empty and has been empty for 5 years, 10 years, the biggest question there, if you're thinking, okay, well, actually we need space for other studios, is why is this building empty still? Who owns it? Like, there are most places that information is relatively easy to get hold of. And if you can get hold of that, that's your starting point. And the power balance there is who is not doing their job well. Like, because that's the question you should be asking. If this is empty and this has remained empty for a very long period of time, somebody is not being impactful. Something has happened in that system. Maybe not, let's blame the people, let's blame the process. There is something in the process that's not working. And if you can become the solution to the process that is not working, that's the space where you have a bit of power. And that's the space where you can start that conversation. And the trick is to start it, but then also to then make an awareness of going forward, like at what points do I hold more power? And then you can plan for those. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I don't, I feel like you said most of the stuff that was said in my one cafe, so I don't know if I have so many more impressions from that, but I'm thinking about this, also this kind of question of when is the time to move, and what do you do when you sense that there is a certain feeling in the air, or someone, like, how do you seize that moment? But I think what you said seems like a really good idea, to try to figure out, like, how can you be the answer to a problem instead of, and I think that's also what we've been trying a lot to do, is to not frame it as, oh, you need to help these poor artists, we are poor and you need to, like this constantly, like, but to try to say, no, we need to be here, and so to this kind of thinking that you are actually the answer and not the problem, is, yeah, good way to try to think about it.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about actually the role of project developers actually also within the process, and then but also the question, how could you actually become from get maybe not really joint ventures, but like from these opposite positions, which usually these are the artists, these are the developers, this is the city. How can you actually come to a joint understanding actually in that process, and to understand that you can learn from each other, and in the end the result is actually better one than before, which everybody profits on. And then the question was how or who could be the connection point, like who actually is able to do the communication between all these different actors, and but then also has enough power to really get the process going on, because this is very difficult on the one hand, and also being taken serious from each side. So you have to have the knowledge and the understanding from all the different logics in to kind of really accelerate that in some way. So we are talking or thinking a lot about this coordination position, which doesn't exist yet, and which could maybe help to be really, very, very, very early on in the process, because we also talked about that quite often even the Department of City Planning doesn't really know what is going on like 10 years before they are actually doing their plans. And that would actually be the time when they should be in already to really shift the difference and what is the outcome of the process. Yeah, I think that was what we talked about.
Yeah. Thank you, René, and thank you, Mikaela and Leah. And I just want to right away also follow up on what you just said, but maybe to everybody else also. You were talking, René, about that you need this coordinating person, but what I also heard is that this coordination position has to be a very steady one, right? Because it's all processes that take quite a long time. And here I wanted to follow up a bit maybe on your field also more, because the term of urban practice is a term that I've heard so much in the last years in connection, for instance, to Planboot and so on, as in my opinion, a practice that is more decentral and maybe a possibility to have the coordination position not so centralized. Could you tell us a bit more about the possibilities of the new networks that evolve there in projects like Planboot and yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Can I? I think there are different processes going on with the term urban practice. I would actually say, but know if everybody's familiar with that. Though there's a very urgent push from Berlin in the moment to really get urban practice as a art practice or urban practice actually, also from architects and planners into the position that it's taken seriously. So that is the one hand, but then I would actually say urban practice, of course, comes from artistic urban practice, which has been there for a very, very long time and which is very important in the field of urban development, but is not recognized as being important. I think these are two different sides, actually. And what you and then in Hamburg, there's also this process or people working on it to say, okay, actually we could be as urban practitioners, we could be this coordination or this intersection point where we can make up for the dialogue. So, but then still there's a very important question of resources and of being taken seriously, because I think in the moment. There are a lot of very good people, very intelligent people, very hardworking people who have the knowledge and who do work in that field, but who are, I would say, not taken seriously by our city departments, which are doing the city, actually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and that's leads over a bit also to my question to Sylvia and to explain a bit more, because Sylvia, you're an artists association, right, originally. IGBK is as well, with honorary members, so the issue of mobilization and a broader mobilization, it's a very important issue for associations like us, and also to take the idea into the future. And maybe you can tell me a bit, Sylvia, about how is it for you as Atelier für die Kunst to mobilize people for your work in Hamburg? Yeah.
Well, this is a difficult question. What I was thinking when I was listening to you is I think we need a frame which comes basically, I mean, our counterpart in many projects is still the city, because they have the potential and they have, if they want to, the possibility to put rules on what's happening. So there can be so many active, voluntarily working people and participating artists as long as they're not the financial resources or the real estate or the plans, the conditions under which spaces are identified. We all cannot do anything. And I'm back sometimes on the very practical questions like, couldn't there be a rule that if there are huge new buildings, projects are done, that a certain percentage of the square meters are dedicated to cultural use, and under what conditions? Not only that there should be cultural use, but as well it should be financed through the other parts of the building. So I'm sorry, I see smiling because everybody knows me saying these things again and again, but I think we all rely on that, and then we come to the point who develops the ideas, what should happen in there, and what's the different ideas, who participates in developing that. But first of all, we need concept ruled giving of land or spaces to start from there.
Thank you. Yes, I know about this concept of yours in Hamburg von Atelier für die Kunst. We spoke about last night, and maybe we can get more deeply into it later on also. But I want to come back to the question really not so much who are we addressing or what are our goals, but more before that, how do we mobilize persons to support our resources? And because you can only do so and so much as one person or 10, or I don't know how many members Ateliers für die Kunst has and how many resources Ateliers für die Kunst has. Mikaela, maybe you want to add to that, because much of this work is being done on an honorary basis, and there is, and if endurance is so important, we need to mobilize person interested in supporting the goal. And even before the goal. So Mikaela, maybe you can, how is it in Denmark?
Well, we have the same problem. It's like, you know, as we also talked about before, artists, like compared to, for example, the performing arts, I mean, music and stuff like that. There you always work collectively, so they also are often much better at bargaining and getting good at deals because they're used to working together because they know they rely upon each other. Whereas within the visual arts, we are used many, so of course some work collectively, but many are like one artist, and it's and we're all so precarious, so we're just fighting for whatever we have for ourselves, and are very bad at this collective bargaining or collective mobilizing together. So I think it's hard because people are, you know, struggling to make ends meet, and to then on top of that have time to do all this volunteer work to organize. It's super hard. I can't. I don't know how to say what to do about that.
Yes, but I think, as I experienced, for instance, the associations are quite strong in Scandinavia. In my,
I mean, there's yes and no. It's actually quite interesting because I was just on a study trip to Oslo in Norway, and I would say that the organizations, the way that they're organized in Norway compared to Denmark, it's kind of quite interesting because I feel like there's a lot more solidarity in Norway, and it partially has to do with how the artist associations are organized. So I'm gonna quickly go into that because it's kind of structural. So in Denmark, we had a lot of artist organizations, but they were all organized through like one is called the colorists, so people that work with paint, like in sort of types of art, like minimalist or whatever. And whereas in Norway they were organized as sculpture, painting, photography. So the ones in Denmark that were organized about different movements, they kind of, so all the artists were organized in groups together, but of course they didn't renew over time because they were with one types of work. Whereas in Norway, because it was just the material, they are very strong today because they constantly could renew because they weren't a certain type of art. And then also in Denmark, you have these work grants that you can get for living or for producing your art, and it's constantly being attacked. And you constantly have to fight, and it's not very much money, but it's constantly being attacked, and you have to justify why do you support artists and stuff like that. Whereas in Norway, it's this way that every artwork that's sold, 5%, also new artworks, but also older, 5% go into a fund, and this fund then pays out the working grants. And that kind of, so that structural change in how you get the money is, first of all, they don't have to argue because it's their own money. And then second of all, you know, like the, whatever, like very, very commercial painter that maybe most people don't think, most artists are maybe not so interested in their work, but everyone's happy because they're bringing in a lot of money to the collective pot. And so that kind of makes for a much more solidarity and a much more solidarity scene. So there are many nuances also within Scandinavia of the funding, I would say.
true, but you have a strong background from your association, right? You have a strong support in your work.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I guess so.
Yeah, but for instance, Lee, how is it? Who are actually the ACME members? You know, you said it's a charity. Who are the association backbone that push your goals?
That's our office staff, to be honest.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah, okay, interesting.
So we're a charity. We have a board of trustees, but who have a very traditional governance role. So they oversee the work of us in the office insofar as making sure that what we're doing ties into our charitable objectives. No one's, going to Ibiza with the funds, all of those sorts of things. But we have a strategic plan that we set in relation to our mission, and then the activity, it's driven by our staff. It's driven by collectively what our strategic mission is, and then we will push that forward, which is why I'm always indebted to and amazed by how phenomenal our staff team are. But we are also in the position of having a slightly larger team than other organisations might have. So we have 25 staff members with some part-time contracts, so the equivalent of 16 staff members, which actually, for a lot of advocacy organisations, I hear it's like 2 or 3 staff members. So actually that gives us a little bit more traction. But within the London context, one interesting thing, which is something that I've not mentioned before, but I do find interesting in this kind of glue role, or this bringing together, is for about 10 years now, London has had what are called creative enterprise zones. And that has been an initiative from the Greater London Authority, which is the Mayor's office. And they sort of started out of these ideas of picking particular areas or boroughs that had artistic activity, cultural activity, and had potential to sort of further cultural activity. And they are awarded this notion of being a cultural enterprise zone that normally comes with a staff member, which is embedded in the local council. And there have been successes, some mixed successes. There's a report that can be downloaded from Mayor of London website, which is 10 years of this program. And actually what they have found, that there's like, I think it's something like 10 to 20% greater cultural resilience in those areas than in other areas that don't have the enterprise zones. When you talk to the individual staff members who are creative enterprise zone officers or whatever their job titles happen to be, their response is a little bit more mixed in that, so what they're there to do is to bridge the massive gulf between planning and culture and cultural organizations within those sectors. So they are there to do that, for that role. The tricky thing that they have at the moment is they're there to do that, and some of them do it incredibly well, but they have no real power. So one of the things, which are the recommendations going forward, and part of the lobbying of the group that I'm involved in, is to strengthen the powers of the creative enterprise zone, which is to give them, for example, things like the power of veto over planning, if it looks like that planning, from their perspective, the planning that's gone in for application does not fulfill long-term cultural aims. So at the moment, they don't have the power to veto anything. They have the power of conversation, where they can sort of G things along, and they can bring up the fact that a particular development is devoid of what it should be doing, or that what's been said is not going to translate. So they can do that conversationally, but they're kind of limited to any real power. So having said that, they have made positive change. And so it's an interesting report, and I would recommend it, and it's a good model, I think. But if they were given a bit more teeth, they could make real change. So yeah, that's something that I think is worthwhile.
Can I ask a follow-up question there? Is that, you say, if they were given a bit more teeth, on which level is that about that it should reach the next higher level of decision?
To be honest, it wouldn't need to be the next level up. It just means those people in those existing roles that have now been created, if the responsibility of that role became something that was a deciding vote on, like if they had more power within the role that they had, then actually at the moment where they have to rely a lot on goodwill, so they rely on conversation and they rely on sort of bringing these actors together, these disparate groups together, but they are then beholden to the inherent goodwill of all of those actors to play nice. Mm-hmm. And actually, when you are a commercial developer and your remit is profit, like that's your role. If that is up against the other things, quite often one will lose to the other. And if you are somebody who is there for your arts community, your role is a different role, and then looking at profit will lose because that's not your focus. So at the moment, they can sort of negotiate. It's a bit like a mediation space where they can try and mediate a better outcome for everyone, but that's not binding. And so really there needs to be, it's that carrot and stick thing, there needs to be something that's binding. So when I say I think they need more teeth, that's what I think they need. Like if they were given a veto power that says no, planning can't happen because it's not fulfilled my criteria or our borough criteria as a creative enterprise zone, our responsibilities, then that would be helpful. So even without that, so for example, we have worked very closely where the propeller factory is with that individual that has enabled the conditions that really helped us put a strong proposal to the private landlords of the organisation, which got us to the point of, there was a point where we were just going to lose that building and there was nothing that we could do about it at all. And then we were able to move from that to the fact that working with this person and working sort of with planning, that we could get a limit on the building so that any future developer could not build above the current height. So with that in place, and that was through that sort of conversation, and with, it's not a listed building, but it's a special interest building in terms of the industry and the history, but with all these little things in place, it made it less capable of being turned into high-rise luxury flats. It made it more difficult for that to occur. And because it was more difficult for that to occur, then our landlords were more open to have a conversation with us about being the potential purchasers of that. Mm-hmm. So if we didn't have those other things in place, then it would have been a lot harder to even get a conversation going about, well, we could buy this, we think we might be able to buy the building, but we can't offer you the amount of money that you want. Mm-hmm. Like we can get 3/4 of the way there. Are you happy with selling it to us below market at this? So, but without those other bits, that's been the benefit, that's the beauty of that role. And if they were given a little bit more again, then we could see actually for other organisations in other parts of London, the benefits could be seismic because they don't have the resources that we have, but also our resources in and of themselves are limited as well. So I think there's real potential for growth.
But yes, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of potential, but also with all the background that ACME has, right? We've heard about it, that ACME has such a long history and so much knowledge. Many things that you speak about, I think we are quite far away from in Hamburg or Copenhagen, I don't know. But if I think about Berlin or Hamburg, this is a scenario where we don't have that strong actor as ACME seems to be yet, and not in the same way. Sylvia, maybe you can tell me a bit about the scene more in Hamburg in that context.
Yes, and what came to my mind when I listened to both of you is that what we definitely need are allies. It's not us artists, or it should not be us, who support these ideas. We do as much as we can, but thinking back to the beginning of Ateliers für die Kunst, is that was founded by a retired person of the Ministry of Education together with gallerists, and then artists came within. And I just took over because nobody else wanted to. So this is how I ended up with this role. And so at that spot we lost allies, but we need foundations, we need well, private activities as well as state-supported. And what I'm trying to do here is to give a more public understanding about what's needed and why it's needed and what's the role of art in society and why this is in the interest of the whole society that we do our work. And this way hoping that we incorporate more people from different parts of society who would support us and see the need of what should happen to keep us doing our work.
Yes, and this is why I insisted so much on the mobilization question, because you are speaking about needing to find allies, but like you said, it was a long time ago and you jumped into it almost by coincidence, and it needs persons to support these basic structures, basically. And I want to come back to you, René, really about it, because I think I really would like to know myself as an association person, how can I, also take back today to largen the work of the associations to find allies also from other urban fields and try to find good arguments together how to strengthen those spaces with cultural spaces and artist working spaces. And would you have, like tips for us to take with us? Or, yeah.
Just looking for help here. Anyone else has an idea? I think I can't have like that solution like that, of course. Yeah, but then on the one hand, of course, this coming, at least coming together, like reaching out also for other maybe groups that have, they have difficulties maybe to be heard, like to team up is of course one thing, and maybe really, I still find it like that you don't have in the urban planning processes, like sometimes you have, but sometimes not, like to have all these, very often it's like social and cultural issues which don't have such a word in the development, and maybe it would be very helpful to, and I don't know how to do that, but to go more forward and directly, maybe it's even going to the district mayors, I don't really know yet, but to say, okay, actually you're going to develop things here, so you have to take us in as partners, as you need our knowledge to make this to lively spaces, because of course what everyone wants or aims for is kind of these healthy living urban quarters, like the whole story, right? Like all the words, but then also to show, okay, actually who does contribute to these qualities actually, and then say, okay, it's us, it's them, and are we at your table? And then maybe the answer is, oh, sorry, no, you are not. Maybe this could be one way, because I know there is also now this initiative in Hamburg which is called, what is it called? Lively Quarters. Cool. Anyone heard from it? Cool? No one? Okay, it's something with quartier and living quarters. And every district in Hamburg has designed like one district which is going to be developed in the future more urban actually. In Altona, I know it's Bahrenfeld, but every district choose one. Like we have 7 districts, and everyone choose one quarter. And there they actually now really looking on forehand to say, we do have to start thinking about it. Sorry, I'm laughing. When a lot of urban development is happening and a lot of people are moving there, we do have to need in advance that we do need social infrastructure. Wow! And we have to be with the process or even before the process. And that's so interesting that they just recently, like 3-4 years ago, came to that point that they do need that. That's why I'm laughing. So, but still, this initiative exists, and that would be maybe a point to really say, okay, so you don't only need, of course, place for kindergartens, for sportives, and for cultural spaces, but really also for artistic space, for ateliers, because now I know again that the ateliers are not in. The other stuff, I think, is kind of cared about, but really to consider artist working space and living space, as you said, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's not in the concept yet. So, and that would be maybe a point to say, though, if these are pilot quarters, then do something for us here and show to others how it could work here, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I think I liked what you said. This everybody wants healthy living, because it's a very short way of summing it up a bit in the communication a bit. I think healthy living as in a living which has social, cultural, and maybe also ecological, and puts these three things together, and yeah, I think it very much sums up the need for like small slogans or a communication that sums up our arguments together. And we had in the pre-discussion, we also we talked about what is the best argument for the work that you're doing. And maybe Mikala, you and Leah, I found this really interesting yesterday. You can repeat it, but about the exchange, why is it important that artists are in those buildings? What does this bring? In your study, this appeared a bit. It basically brings economic advance to the neighborhood. And
yeah. Well, as I said before, there's a lot of benefits just commercially. It actually makes economically sense to have artists in your neighborhood or in your town or in your area. But I think so. It's not a problem. It's a solution. But also this. Oh, now I'm blanking. I was thinking about something else that you were saying.
Well, it's coming back a bit about what you mentioned earlier on also, that you have the situation that you get the feedback that maybe the support will not be there because it's a professional support and not a cultural support. How do you, for artists, working spaces won't be paid because they pay a profession.
Yeah.
How do you counter that?
Well, we say, well, no, artists are not a business like any other business, but they bring out all these other things, which is social cohesion and all these other kind of benefits to the area that they live, that you have an identity and something. And so what we're trying to say with regards to urban planning is, right, you constantly use art as a way when because also in Denmark, in Copenhagen, they're developing a lot of new areas for people to live. Right, and then so for example, the old brewery Carlsberg, their old where they were, that was like developed, and they started out having galleries and a dance theater and studios and all that stuff, so which kind of generated this kind of cultural vibe. It was something was happening there, right, and then they started building everything, and all the culture moved to a different area, right? So like the logic of the urban planning has constantly been to use, everybody knows this, right? The gentrification, to use culture, to use art as a way to kind of gentrify a neighborhood, and then it becomes too expensive for the artists, and then they move, and then you kind of have this dead area. So what we're really trying to argue is don't use it just, we want permanent solutions, so that the artists are not just brought in there to make the area attractive, but that you don't just think about for the first 5-10 years that they can kind of use these empty buildings before they're developed, but know that they are integral to the whole development, to the whole neighborhood. So you need to ensure that they can also stay there after the area has been developed.
Maybe just a short adding to that, because it's as you said, and then the neighborhoods very often become like non-lively after everything moved out, right? And we can really see that in certain areas which have been developed in that kind of way. And this is something actually one could point to and say, okay, this is what happens if we are not in, or if we don't stay. So really to show that, because sometimes it's really, I don't know if you like then these new build-up areas where actually you basically can do nothing but live. So, and this can't be the city of tomorrow, I would say.
Yeah, it doesn't give another like health, instead of maybe healthy living, it's like quality of life, right? Like what makes an area nice to be in. It's also that something surprising happens, or something that's not commercial, or something that, all these kind of things.
That's just made me think of an example which also then becomes beneficial from that developer point of view. So in London, so there's a developer called Ballymore, and they've done a huge kind of redevelopment in a part of East London there's a bigger plan for many houses, but they've done a large development there, and as part of that, their anchor tenant on this development, which has multiple buildings, and I can't remember exactly how many, but something like 20,000 homes. Like, it's a big complex. But their anchor tenant, it was English National Ballet, and that was moving the ballet to this, and they embedded the ballet as their like permanent tenant, as an anchor tenant. So what I mean by that is that they built out like this massive complex with rehearsal rooms, with everything, and they worked proactively with the ballet for them to be able to purchase that, or 99-year lease, so like long leasehold purchase. That became, it's happened relatively recently, but that process had become quite so successful because then, of course, off the back of that, saying that the ballet has moved here, they can then go and sell all the apartments with this. Well, actually, it's not a 5 or 10 year thing. This is the permanent home of the ballet. This is the performances. This is. They're not going anywhere. So there was a whole process of that, and then it attracted other. There's that whole gentrification process, but with long-term genuine benefits, and then sort of operationally for that organization, for the developer, they are now sort of the go-to sort of socially aware, socially conscious developer. So they are now involved in government level discussions about future planning. It was a stroke of sort of brand awareness genius from their point of view, but also it had a genuine long-term benefit, and they are sort of replicating that now when they're looking at their developments about like who has the capacity to be and what permanency can we get in there, because they've now seen the benefit. They can see the hard cold like cash, as well as they are actually on the developer's a good developer. So yeah, they have a social conscience. So that just reminded me of that. So those things can work, but of course you need to have a certain level behind you as that cultural tenant. So, you know, the ballet had to fundraise themselves. Actually, I think they came short a little bit, and the developer became their sponsor at the end to get them over the line. So that was a really good working relationship. So I think those things, in many ways, it's not always about reinventing the wheel. It's about tweaking a thing that already exists. And that's also a lot less risky and a lot less scary for other actors. So it's more, has a higher chance of success when you're not saying, here's this shiny new thing that hasn't existed before. You're saying, well, actually, you do this now, but here's where it falls down. Here's the problem. If you just tweak the way that you're doing this, then you can get better success. So I think quite often it's about tweaking existing measures than trying to sort of start from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And maybe linking a bit to that in a certain way, I want to come back what you said initially about your idea for Hamburg, the 1.5% of artists' working spaces for each building being built. And I want to put this back into the round here because I would like to ask a bit from your experience. I think, Lee, you stand very much for a certain model with ACME, but what is, if to secure these spaces, to repeat again, what is the best model? You know, is it having an intermediary as an association who rents out the spaces and then gives them out, or a more direct obligation with every new building being built? I mean, what is better, renting or buying?
Depends on the context. It really does. Because if you've got, in theory, the control of owning your own building is the way to go, because it's self-determination. Your board, your staff, whatever, that you can work towards long-term, and you have greater control, in theory, depending on the context in which you're working, because actually you have that control, but you have huge costs that come with it as well. So if you know that you've got, like we do, we know that we will never be able to fulfill the amount of artists who need studios in London. So that's low risk for us in terms of a pipeline of people wanting our studios. but in a different place where you don't know that. Like if there's a real risk there that on those costs, actually renting can be much, much better, especially if you can get a peppercorn, if you can have that, and that will depend on your relationship with whoever that landlord is, be it private or governmental, and how you can service that relationship, for want of a better word, like how you can, over the years, amend that and make sure that you're getting the best value for money. So I would always come back down to your own personal context. And I think it's always really useful to kind of look at it, take yourself out of the equation and just look at the location, the city, the way that things currently work, and go, all right, well, within this context, what's the most impactful thing I can do?
Mm-hmm. And Mikaela, but what you proposed to us, for instance, in your presentation, those are all municipal buildings, right? Who owns the buildings?
The artist housing now?
Yeah.
No, one is it's owned by the artist, so that's their own building, but that has huge problems because so what they have of income is what people, so it's all artists living there, it's all artists who are on the board, it's the people who live there who run the building, and they're all poor artists, and then so they decide on what they pay as rent, and they have to vote on what they pay as rent, and of course most artists they haven't been paying enough in rent, basically, so their building is crumbling and they have a huge problem financing how to get it repaired because they haven't been willing to raise their rent so that they could have running repairs on it. So that's like that, and then the two others are social housing. So one of them is kind of, it's probably one of those moments where something just happened, where it was a young architecture student who went into like one of the social housing organizations and said, I think we need artist houses, and I've drawn them, and then they and it happened, but that was in 1953, and it hasn't been replicated since, right? But it was a moment where something like that was possible by someone who had an idea and went it. So there you are, on a list within the social housing. So it has a slightly different, and the two others are like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in Hamburg, so you are intermediary structure, right? But there's new cooperatives being set up, like Friese, but then newer ones also in the last years that build up new buildings by themselves, right?
No, this was all about already existing buildings, which was given to them on a lower price, like the Frappant or the whole Gängeviertel system was based on that. Of course, they founded a cooperative, but they got the building on a price or on conditions which were much lower than the market price. But I would like to refer again to about this percentage thing. There's probably a misunderstanding due to my English. The idea is absolutely that I think renting or supporting the rent by certain systems is the way to be, even for new built spaces, because that's how it is. If you own a space, it's too expensive to run it yourself. And the idea was that new buildings, new developments from a certain size onwards would put this into their initial investment that they have, a certain amount of square meters to give to a rent which is lower than what they needed to cover the costs. So this is part of the whole development thing. You could support this by state-run supportives, as you do for social housing, which we have, these systems to develop a certain quarter of town, or there are different funding systems which support social housing, and the same could apply on spaces for artists, so that they really rent below the real costs of what it would cost if they own it. This is the idea behind it, to implement this in the original investment.
Now, this sounds so very much logical to me, what you're saying, but I have not so much knowledge about the important decision processes in there. And I look a bit to René again. I don't know, if when you listen to Sylvia from your background, maybe you do, maybe you don't, is this realistic and how is it possible to implement that? I wonder, you know, it sounds so easy, but I imagine it is not so easy, right? In an urban planning procedure, who would fix? Yeah.
It's a political decision.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, but
It's a political decision.
yeah.
I would say so too. Of course, it is. It's political in that sense that you have to need to decide where to put the money flows to, right? So that is always a decision to make, and I don't know. Like, of course, you could. Like, I like the idea with this creative enterprise zones or so on. Like, to maybe say, at least we put a person in here in that area because we see there's something happening or something missing, and we need this person, which at least helps to coordinate the processes and also put in our topics. So I thought that was a quite smart idea already, to start with some point and really to get these kind of money flows is what you kind of success, right? Like, because I'm not a what do you say? Like, I'm not a financing person, right? So I'm not into doing the calculations. But of course, it shouldn't be that difficult to do it. Maybe even maybe you start with administration buildings. But then on the other hand, also Hamburg is doing the same. They did the same kind of. They sold their buildings and they rent them back. So on their calculation, it's also difficult to put something aside because they are also not the owners anymore quite often.
But that's what I mean. That's why what the ideas sound so simple, but
yeah. So though that is, if you don't own it, of course, you always have a problem. And then we do all have this. Not all, but we have this difficulties now that everybody, and also like in cultural and education, it's going to be less and less money. And then to say, okay, but then take money from the one side to the other side, even so it's only 1%, it's making difficult because we are in the moment or in the future, if you take something, it always looks like you take it from someone who also needs it. And this is, I think, the wrong level. We need to be start on a very, very different level actually to change things. But I wouldn't know how to do it or of course, we just can to argue for, like in culture, like you could argue to say, okay, let's get the 500 million euros to us, right? So that would be a starting point. But that's maybe what you would need.
Well, maybe, and to add to that also, right, this setup that you mentioned, Silvia, with the 1.5%, and the problem that often the city probably doesn't even own the land anymore to be able to fulfill. That's what I was referring to. But there are, for instance, the whole issue of Kunst am Bau, so art on public buildings, is something that had been decided amongst all the Bundesländer for a certain while in public Ausschreibungen, that the Bundesländer amongst each other had decided on that a certain percentage would have to be for art in public space. So this is maybe also the question if you have to go to another level and find another communication maybe with other Bundesländer, with Hamburg, Bremen, Baden-Württemberg, and so on, and to try to have these questions debated in the KMK, for instance, or yeah.
Yeah, but for example, have it like changing it from, because some counties are doing that, like North Rhine-Westphalia, right? They just relaunched the Kunst am Bau thing, but I think they open it up also to processes, and I think that would be very important that we change the understanding of art on buildings, right? When you build a school, you have to have an artist work, but that you kind of change that to, I would say, art and urban development processes, to really say it's part, and that would maybe refer again to urban practice, to have it already in there, right? Also maybe because also their money is invested. So there could be different levels, like starting with the development, but then also have a very tiny percentage. If you would take like 0.1% of what is being made on money when you transfer it or sell it, would be already be a quite huge amount to involve some different practices in the whole development, I would say, actually. So that could be a starting point to maybe agree on this kind of things in the whole
It's an interesting idea to follow. Yeah, because going on the different lender level and see how it's done in other lender, and then going into different countries. But then again, it was always stated that the local context is so important and cannot be transferred. But what would you think can be transferred now in our discussion? What is something that you could take back to Copenhagen or London or keep in Hamburg? Mikaela, you want to start maybe? Yeah.
I just feel like it's just so generative just to hear the different models and the different ways and tactics of doing this. So I think there's so many bits and parts that I can take with me from this. It's hard to point to specifics. But just generally, but because it is also very obvious that everything, it is so, as you said, very localized, right? So you have different laws that you've been able to sort of twist in London that we just don't have the same laws in Denmark, so you can't really do the same thing. But what I can take with me is to kind of to look at how you can shift the perspective. So even though I can't replicate the exact same laws, I can replicate the thinking behind the laws, right? So that's, I think, is the tactics we can learn from each other, these ways of thinking. And then I think this question of zoning, right, it's also very, that's where we have a moment to act. Is when a city develops a new area, or like if you can put stuff into the zoning there, then you can then keep up on it later. So this kind of what you're also talking about, that you need to get in way before things are actually being built, but within, like, if you can write it into the zoning of the area, then it can actually have a possibility of becoming something. But in Copenhagen, we have the problem that all these areas that are being developed and are being sold off are basically being sold off to generate money for the metro system. So often there is actually a lot of like political, the politicians would like to do what we're proposing, but because they're forced to sell at a very, very high, at the highest price to generate enough income for more metro building, they actually can't really change very much. So we have actually a lot of, like, the politicians look upon our cause with, like, they're interested, they want to do it, but they can't because they're legally obliged to sell at a very high price. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that one example, to say something positive about the situation in Hamburg, maybe. I don't know how well it works. There are people here who know that much better than I do. But we have, as far as I now know, so-called concept. How do you say this in English? So you can buy a plot within Hamburg or get it to build something on it if you pay less of the highest price, but you have a certain concept, like doing artist spaces or social spaces or so, and then you can get it for a lower price than the market price is. This is at least the first step, I guess.
That's interesting. Because immediately my thought would be, well, if that can be leveraged, then a partnership between a cultural organization and a commercial developer, then both of you are bringing something to the table of equal use and power, because ultimately if the plot of land use is going to cost a whole lot less for that development, but you've got a contractual agreement that then says that you own a portion of that, or that X amount of square footage will be in perpetuity for this outcome, then actually that's a win-win for everyone. for all three. So I would be looking at that immediately. So I jump right on that as that would be the mechanism I'd be trying to see if I could get leverage out of. But more broadly, coming back to that idea of what can be taken away, I think that like I have been banging on about context is king. So the context is different. However, the mechanisms for engagement are the same, I think. Absolutely. And so there's a lot that can be taken away from that, which is around, okay, I can't move my position forward unless I know about the other person's position. So actually, regardless of where you are, it's like, okay, I need to give myself a pop quiz or a understanding of how does planning work in my city? Like, what does that look like? And a lot of that information it takes time, but actually it's easily available. It quite often has to be available now online. So understanding the other actors and where they're coming from, that process is something that can be replicated all the time. We've said before, and I think it's absolutely clear, research, third-party, what you could say authoritative voices, third-party authoritative voices are really important, whether that is formalized studies, whether, those are things that you can work with universities to do, you can commission if you've got the money, but if you don't, there's a lot of ways that you can build that wealth of statistical data, which is always going to be super helpful. So I think that, those mechanics of engagement, that having conversations, figuring out who are in these roles, checking in with them. Like, we have partners, for example, who I check in with every 6 months, which is essentially a coffee chat. What are you doing? What are we doing? Knowing full well there is no crossover for either of us at any point in the horizon that I can look at, and I look at pretty long horizons, but there might be. So it's keeping those relationships in, and it's that whole thing around luck. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation, right? And then you get your lucky moment is because you are prepared for the thing that you want, and the opportunity finally has come. That's the moment. So that's my personal motto. I'm sharing that.
Yeah, that's great. It's very, very helpful. And I think, you stated it again, keeping relationships, right, over a long term. We're not finished yet. I want to add more about the international exchange here. Nevertheless, context is king. I know. I mean, we all know that. But still, I think you said this also, Lee, we can, the questions really, again, how to mobilize and engage persons and actors into your goals, this can be learned from each other, I think. Hopefully it can be learned from each other. And again, Lee, at this point, but you just joined On the Move, the International Mobility Network, and so there must be a reason there to step more actively on the international level. And can you add to that a bit, maybe? Because how do we keep those relationships amongst countries? And
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things, and we had talked at the break a little bit on this as well. It's around not creating extra work, but it's magnifying the work that you're already doing. So what I'm really interested in is the research that's been done in Copenhagen, because I can take that and I'd like to know other places where they're doing those similar studies. I've got these studies myself. If you're suddenly a consortium of international actors who are all researching in this area, it's a lot more compelling to be able to do that. So it's that idea of bringing together a coalition of like-minded individuals, and I think that is absolutely beneficial. In terms specifically for On the Move, for us, in a very ad hoc way, we have a lot of people who are coming to London who are doing research and study trips, and we do meet them sort of one-on-one. We will never say no to an organisation whose aims appear to be worthy. And the active joining of that international community is a way to kind of formalize that and have to know that those conversations are happening beyond us, because also we have a lot to learn. I mean, we've got a long history, but also long histories mean quite often that you become a little bit entrenched and stable in the way that you work, and actually having new ideas and seeing what other people are doing is really important, and having conversations that are bigger than you. So that's what On the Move is about for me and for ACME, is bigger conversations that have a different and greater rigor than what we can bring ourselves. That's, you know, you inspire by being surrounded by people who are better than you. And that's really what we do.
Great. That sounds great. Mikada, you want to add?
No, it's just also, I could also just say both the report that the municipality did about studios, but then also our report about the possibilities for building artist housing. We were constantly both were pulling on reports from London and from Oslo and from Germany, and kind of because you don't have to invent the wheel, right? Because these are very big and costly surveys and statistics and stuff. So so that is definitely something we can draw upon, all of us internationally, right? What work has already been done about benefits and costs and all these kind of things, which is really, a great resource. And
Yeah, and I think, Sylvia, for you really to start also the symposium, to say, I want to have this international focus, that was really very much, right, a goal for you. Also, maybe you want to add some things.
Yeah, well, for me, this was already, I mean, even meeting you last night was already a step forward in understanding how it works at your places, and I'm curious how it's elsewhere. Well, there is a point. I made quite some experience with the European Union, or the how do you call this? In the field of journalism, they have a union which is an international union, and what they do for their regional places and what they give us support in is information. And this is something which, of course, you are in a way linked to that, but which we should much more develop, since economics do a lot of profit out of this European Union thing. And I think there are chances for us as well in developing what we need, and not only exchanging what's not going well, but as well seeing what's happening and what can we learn from it. And I really would love to continue that, and with the idea of maybe setting up a loose network. Whoever can join can put in whatever there is, and then we see where it goes.
Yeah, and maybe add some even more perspectives, right, from other European countries. I mean, I like how you said there are chances for us developing together what we need. I think that's a very nice way to put it. And I hope that today was a possibility for us to develop a bit more what we need. And I'm very much looking forward, especially really to the recordings and to sharing that, and hoping that there will be more responses afterwards. But we haven't actually asked you in the crowd if you would like to add some more comments also from your World Cafe experience, and some questions. Are there more, anything that was discussed in the World Cafe that we didn't take up here? No? Well, it's been a long day, and I think it's important that everybody has inscribed him or herself on the list. If you would like to receive those videos then also, and maybe follow up exactly if we're going to pursue this more. And yes, René, please.
Yeah, just before we finish, I just wanted to add one thing into the international perspective. Is maybe also from this planning viewpoint, that we always look to the others, especially metropolis cities like London, Copenhagen, Vienna, Paris. And the fun part is that Hamburg looks to Vienna, Vienna looks to Hamburg, and the other way around. So it's always this kind of thing. We want to be like the others. So this can also be a huge part of this international network to say, yeah, actually, I know that London is doing it in that way and Copenhagen is that way. So, and this helps actually also, again, as an argument for yourself. So I think this is an important part of an international network where everybody can benefit from, because it's really always the same. I think even Paris is looking for some other cities, which couldn't be imaginable for us, right? But this always is, and this is, I guess, a big point for the international interconnection, and maybe just keeping up that coffee table to to know when the window of opportunity might come up.
And maybe I can do a little ad because I'm very glad about this round we found here, but as well about the audience, which really came from all kinds of fields. We don't have an audience here of frustrated artists who came to listen to, you know, where's the solution, but from all areas of people who as experts are working on this issue, you are here, and I'm very happy about that, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, then I think we can go into more discussion if we want to, and maybe one more drink. But I don't know if we can go into the rain now, so we can just enjoy the conversation further. And I thank you very much, René. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Lee. And thank you, of course, most of you to Sylvia, and also to Doris and everybody who joined. Thank you very much.
Thank you.